Hey everybody, Mike with Games Play Badly, and today on Session 0 I have a very exciting game. It is called Fight to Survive, and I have its creator, James, with us tonight. He is going to talk to us all about this amazing game. Now, he calls it a martial arts role-playing game that meets heart, and I challenged him to tell me what that meant, and he did in spades. I'm very, very excited about it. I want to play it. I didn't realize I wanted to play it until he explained it to me. So please stick around, and we have an additional 10 or 20 minutes that I would not normally include in the video. It's the post-interview stuff. We just sat there and chatted, but there was some really interesting information about why he created the game, how him growing up in the area that he did, being queer, affected the way that he wrote this game. And then he and I shared some experiences about being in that space in our adolescence and how we dealt with it. So if you want to hear that, by all means, stay past the end of the video. We'll include it. Just as a warning, I do vape, so I'm vaping on camera. I don't normally do that during my normal interviews, but I didn't know we were going to include it, so it's there. And I hope you do watch it because I think it's some really great information. As usual, I have my Gem Firefly shirt on, and I love them. I love Matt. Matt's been a big supporter of ours. He's a super, super nice guy, and he creates quality products. If you want a shirt like this, or you want to get a mug or a flag or whatever else he's creating, because he creates so much, make sure you go up to gemfirefly.com, and when you get done picking out all your good stuff, put in our discount code BADLY15, BADLY 15 at checkout for 15% off your order. If you like what we're doing here, by all means, like and subscribe. We would love to have you as part of the Games Played Badly family. James is right around the corner. That interview starts now.
Oh, hi, Mike. Haven't seen you in a while. Nice
Absolutely.
glasses, you know.
These are new, by the way. I'm glad you know.
Well, they're lovely. I think they're okay. So, hi, I'm James Kerr. I'm a tabletop role-playing game publisher. I do Radio James Games. You can catch me on radiojamesgames.com. I've got a Kickstarter coming out for my new game called Fight to Survive, a role-playing martial arts meets heart. The Kickstarter is launching on Thursday, March 24th. I don't know when this is airing, but it's launching on Thursday, March 24th. So it may already be launched. This is not my first role-playing game. This isn't even my first Kickstarter. I did six books for Pendlehaven Press, which is in Canada. I'm also in Canada. They did the Fate of the Norn system, if you're familiar with it, that deals with pulling runes out of a bag instead of rolling dice. It's all fun. It's a Viking system. It's a lot of fun. You can check them out at fateofthenorns.com. So I did a bunch of books for them. And the last one that I did was a core rule book where I did development and editing, and it was the project manager of the Kickstarter. And so I thought, well, I've got all these games, like a backlog of games that I want to get out there, and let's start with this one. So I started with Fight to Survive, which is a role-playing martial artists in the 20th century. And the shtick is that it's more mundane. Like, we're not talking about Street Fighter 2 and throwing fireballs. I love Street Fighter 2. I was an arcade champion in the early 90s.
Were you?
Yeah, I was. It was one of my few claims to fame. But we're not doing that. We're doing something a little bit more dialed back, because as we were talking before you started recording, there's a few games out there where you can play like anime style fighting game type stuff, but this deals more like, it's like one of my elevator pitches has been Mouse Guard meets Jean-Claude Van Damme's Bloodsport. You know?
That's quite the juxtaposition.
I mean, it is and it isn't, because what's Mouse Guard about? It's about survival. It's about it's kind of gritty, you know, like everything out there could eat you like a giant snake. And what's Bloodsport about? You know, you're in an isolated place, you're in a strange place, and everything out there is trying to attack you. And it has similar thematic representation. Not to get too fine of a point on it, but the point is, Fight to Survive is about it's a multi-generational game where each play session can be up to 1 to 3 years of time. And so you move through the 20th century fairly quickly with a martial lineage where you're passing down your skills and your knowledge and you're teaching onto other people and continuing to play that way. Did you ever play, Mike, King Arthur Pendragon by Greg Stafford?
I have not. I've heard of it.
Okay, well, it's a lot like that in that way, in the way that you have this kind of generational heritage. So you might start off in the 1920s playing like a crooked gambler who's involved in street fights and end up befriending some orphan kid, and then you end up dying in a knife fight in a back alley in 1945, and then the kid who's now 13 decides to carry on your martial legacy, and on and on it goes.
So now would that be your next iteration of your character?
Yeah,
that's kind of awesome. Again, you mentioned a game that I've never played before, but I've never seen anything done like that. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, there's a few games that have a kind of generational aspect, even if it's not familial. King Arthur Pendragon by Greg Stafford is one of the first ones because it came out in the late 70s, I think was the first edition. I could be wrong. It could have been the early 80s. And then Legacy, Life Among the Ruins, is another game that has a multi-generational aspect. So people have, and it has Legacy has a number of break-offs. So people have done it before. But this is a weird game. Mike, I've got to admit to you, it's a weird game because it's a very indie game. I'm sorry, but it's multi-generational. It's diceless, and it's diceless without being arbitrary. I promise you. And it's got a lot of emotion. It's got emotion to it. It's got impact to it. So fights are resolved. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. If you want to cut me off, by all means, cut me off.
The show's for you. It's not for me. You'll have heard me talk way too much. I want to hear you talk for a change.
Well, see, because when I say diceless, people sometimes there's only two reactions. There's the people who are diceless geeks who go, "Oh yes, tell me more," and those are the people who the dice hate, right? Because dice just hates some people.
Yeah, they have dice jails for a reason.
Yeah, and those people tend to seek out diceless games. It's the people who dice hate. I'm one of those people. And then there's other people the majority of people who go, "Oh, diceless. Oh, I don't. Is it even a role-playing game now?" And I think diceless games have a bad rap because their mechanics are often very open-ended, very they can feel very arbitrary, and it's hard to care about the subject matter if you don't understand the stakes.
Right.
So a lot of care was put into the design of this game to make sure that everything you're doing feels meaningful. You can act in character, but it is mechanically reinforced. There's nothing in the game that is done relevantly that doesn't have a mechanical reinforcement. Not to say it's especially complicated. I like to say that it's rules medium, but it's probably only rules medium because there's quite a bit of a learning curve to understanding how it's structured. But I mean, it's simple enough. I run it at conventions. Everybody gets it by the time they leave the table, but it's good times.
I have interviewed people who do diceless games, and they sound wonderful. I mean, I have not played any, but I'm not saying I'm opposed to it. So,
well, I'm of the firm opinion that there's a lot to develop in terms of game mechanics in this hobby. That there are many, many things to do. There are many places to go, and there's a lot to explore. And I will adopt whatever mechanic will best suit the genre emulation that I'm trying to achieve and the design goals I'm trying to achieve. I've done games with dice, I've done games without dice, I've done games with cards, whatever it takes to get you where you need to go. And a lot of this system was born out of dissatisfaction with martial arts and how it's depicted in other systems, as we were talking about before. On one hand, you've got games like Ninjas and Super Spies by Eric Wujcik that's overly complicated. You'd have to become a martial artist to be able to know how to do it. And on the other side of things, you've got things like some of the most popular games are some of the most worst offenders for it's so heavily abstracted as to just being a list of superpowers that it bears very little resemblance to any real punching and kicking. You're really just rolling against an AC. And for some people, that's not a satisfying experience that they'd like to have. So I wanted to build a satisfying experience that you can have in terms of feeling like a fight. I mean, you can chase reality. You can't achieve reality at emulation, but we can make an attempt in terms of reality's feeling. We're going after verisimilitude. We're not trying to emulate, any kind of true sense. And but also on the other side of things is I was watching Bloodsport. I don't know if do you remember Bloodsport?
I do, yes.
Okay, so I was watching Bloodsport, and there was a scene where Jean-Claude Van Damme is on the bus, and he's on the bus in Hong Kong, and Stan Bush is playing in the background. He's singing some kind of sad love song or something, and Jean-Claude Van Damme, in the reflection of the window, sees his enemy, Chong Li, and has to look across the bus, and he's not actually there. He's feeling haunted by his enemy. And I thought, people make fun of these movies for having lousy plots, but that's a neat emotional beat right? Like it's emotional. Like he's always haunted. He's haunted by the structure of it. And I don't want to get all like Roland Barthes and talk about like pro wrestling as the final stage of Greek drama. But the point is, I thought to myself, can we get a game to do that? Like, because no role-playing game will do that right now. Like, you give a mechanical relevance to being haunted on a Hong Kong bus by the vision of your enemy. So I wanted to structure a game that had emotional weight, that had a kind of mechanical reinforcement to playing out things like having a training montage. We wouldn't call it a training montage, we call it a training regime, because we're trying to do this with a straight face, right? Like this, it's campy, but it's going to be a straight face. So give relevance to something like that so that you can kind of capture the same energy as like, that middle half of Rocky IV, that's all just training montage, and then, hi, Adrian, how are you? And then training montage. And then the last 40 minutes is a fight, So let's achieve that kind of energy in the game in a kind of relevant ways that isn't like hand-wavy downtime activity.
Okay. So James, I had to stop you because you talk about being able to elicit all, or to utilize all this emotion that you're seeing in some of these genres that you enjoy. How is that applied in this game?
Every character has a set of comforts and people, places, and things that are important to them. And you list a bunch of them, and some of them have special mechanical effects, but generally speaking, you just write down somebody and you give them, they get a number according to what you're able to give to them. So you might say, my boyfriend Bobby +3, or you might be like my boxing gym +4, or you might say my pocket watch +1, Sure. And every character has a hardship score that's a lot like their health. In fact, it looks very similar to the health track. And every time something bad happens in the game that has some kind of emotional weight, like, oh, you almost got hit by a car, or oh, you lost your dog, or oh, whatever else, you get a hardship. And your meter keeps filling with hardship. If your meter gets too full of hardship, just like if your health track gets too full, then if it gets too full of hardship, you decide to quit the violent lifestyle and you'll leave the city, because you don't want to participate in it anymore. So what keeps that from happening is you employ your comforts. So you're like, oh, my hardship's up to, it's a little bit more complicated than this, but not very, but my hardship's up to 8. Oh no, like it only goes up to 12. What am I going to do? So during the time that you can within the game, you might choose to go out for drinks with your boyfriend, Bobby, and knowing that Bobby has +3, you're reducing that track down a little bit. So there's this constant tension in the game of like you're mounting hardship, making you want to quit and run away, and making you want to stop. And so that there's a tension between like the glory of violence and like how much it hurts, right?
The toll it takes.
Yeah, the toll it takes, because you get hardship for training, because you're putting strain on your body. You get hardship for something bad happening. You get hardship for lots of things. Every game, the driving force is that one of those comforts, and you write them down knowing this, is put on the chopping block. That's how all the games start. So like, it's like, oh, it's 1972, and Bobby has been kidnapped by a rival biker gang who's jealous of his fantastic hair or something. And then you have to go out and rescue Bobby. If you don't go out and rescue Bobby, then you get the hardship that you've invested your points in year after year trying to cultivate that relationship. And then that could be enough to drive you to quit. You're like, I can't take it. I couldn't rescue Bobby. I don't know what to do with my life. And then you quit this violent lifestyle, at which point you'd have to either generate a new character or pass your teachings on to another character that would be kind of a continuation of. So that there's the physical aspects of what's going on. Like you're getting into fights hurt, you're getting injured, you're only going to last so long potentially before you accrue too much injury that's just not going to go away. Like, oh, I got dislocated this shoulder in 82 and it's bothering me ever since, and things like that. But there's also an emotional side of that too, which is like, when I lost Bobby, I just was never able to get over it, and I haven't been able to get my hardship score down any longer. And I just every game session, like every year of game, I'm teetering on the brink of quitting, and I think I should just pass on the torch to my student at the dojo for him to continue on with the structure, and then you recede into the back and become an NPC. So what happens because of these comforts is the game is a constantly churning pool of like different threads going on, because as PCs, what's joining you together, you don't have to be part of the same school, or you don't have to have anything in common other than the fact that you have to share some comforts. So Bobby might be my boyfriend, but he might be, or
Sure.
he might, or we might all go to the strikeout bowling alley together for fun, because that's where we can go and blow off steam and reduce that hardship. So, I mean, yeah, there's this big, kung fu fight when somebody comes in and smashes the school sign and challenges us all, and we get into the action, but we still have to deal with kind of the emotional consequences of the fact that a comfort is always under threat, and you need to be able to reel yourself in. So it gets pretty.
I love that. I think you've done that's actually a brilliant way of doing it. When you think about it, your character is directly being shaped by not only what is happening to them that's hurting them, but what they're doing to comfort themselves so that way they can stay sane. And
Yeah.
so it's very much this kind of give and take of, or this ebb and flow of, I've had a really bad whatever, whether it be day or week. I need to recoup, I need to recharge. And it becomes a role-playing event where it's not necessarily this mechanical aspect of, yes, my hardships are up here and I want to reduce them, but also it's an aspect of role play and it's motivated by that mechanic. So I think it's brilliant. Yeah.
Well, I mean, to me as a GM, because I'm a forever GM anyway, it's a lot of fun for me because I get to see what happens, because people care about who they care about. They care about who they decide to care about. So if they meet somebody over the course of the year, they meet a number of NPCs. It's always the ones I wouldn't expect that they latch onto and are like, I want to date them, or I want to be friends with them. I want to be roommates, or whatever. Like, the locations they choose to want to return to, they are building the I don't want to say story, because it's kind of a long-term macroscopic narrative. They're building the narrative of what's important by virtue of going and doing and interacting with these elements, and it turns into a lot of fun. So like, and some people are coming out for, I want to beat people up, right? In my mind, I want to use my imagination to beat people up, sure. And I don't want, like, people have different kinds of fun. But other people are coming out to fight to survive because they recognize that in terms of, this is what I had to do in order to properly emulate the genre, right? Like, that they recognize that kind of emotional give and take is a lot of fun, and it's a strong structure, and it's interesting because what happens in kung fu movies, right? Somebody shows up, it kills the brother, you go out and get revenge, you have to train for a little while in darkness, you meet a mysterious master in a cave on a mountaintop, and they teach you a secret technique, and then you get to come back and have your revenge, but there's still like a lot of room. I mean, I don't mean to oversimplify, because like the Shaw Brothers kung fu movies have a huge variety of plots to them, right? But a lot of them follow that kind of like rough, like defeat and train and return for victory kind of structure, and it's so much fun. It can be so much fun. But I wanted something that would be fun, fit the genre of like nominally of fighting action movies, and be fun to play, be intuitive to play, and would feel rewarding. Like, I don't know if did you ever see the Charles Bronson film Hard Times, 1975? It's about
I may have. It would have been a long.
It was a while ago.
Yeah.
It was Charles Bronson is a drifter in 1933 during the Depression, who just goes from town to town, and he comes in on the rails when the movie opens, and he gets involved with James Colburn. Plays a character who's like this hustling manager, and he gets into a number of street fights as James Colburn starts raking in the gambling, but James Colburn can't get over his gambling, and Charles Bronson falls in love with a local woman who's played by his wife at the time, and it's got some really good scenes. It has a lot of heart, and I find that as I return to all of these martial arts movies again and again, they've got a lot of heart, and we can make a fighting role-playing game fine, but like, let's make some context for it. Let's make a purpose for it. Let's make a driving force. Let's put a reason why these things are happening. I didn't want the mechanical reinforcement of being, well, you're here to fight, so what are you doing? Like, just fight. Because there can be whole sessions where people like dodge the fight. That's happened.
No, I think by the sheer mechanics alone, you've allowed the game to evolve beyond just combat, and it has to, because otherwise, if it doesn't, then you're done.
Well, as I was saying before, there's lots of systems out there for just two people fighting. If you really want to do two people fighting, there are those systems. But I wanted more meat on the bones than that. I wanted it to be a little bit more rewarding than that. To be, why are you fighting? And really interesting things result from that, like bravery. Like, bravery becomes a subject that tests the player and not the character, because the player is wondering here, like, oh God, if I get into this fight, I could lose a lot. I could lose my life. I could lose the character. I could, like, what would happen to my like laundromat that I'm running, like, you know,
Sure,
like,
sure, yeah,
and
yeah.
it becomes a risk. Like choices become a risk, and it's all about hard choices and the tension of violence. Because you know we have a lot of fun with violence in imaginary space, right? With role
Oh,
playing games,
sure, yeah.
but violence is also like a really terrible thing, right? So, and I know that's not a fun thing to bring up in role playing games, but like when you recognize mechanically, like if I and there are many other systems that do this in different ways, but when you recognize mechanically the risk of what you're going into,
Mhm.
and you understand the stakes, it has a lot of weight. Like it can be very grim, and it can be very like it can touch very close to home that way, right? So I wanted to make sure that we had that kind of emotional impact so that the moments of victory would feel really rewarding,
Yep.
because you got to earn it. I find there's a problem with stakes in all media these days. Like I don't want to bring them up in vain, but all the superhero movies,
Mhm.
every movie has a world-ending threat. It's always a world-ending
Sure,
threat
sure,
or a universe-ending threat, and I, you know, and I love them and I watch them all, but you find yourself caring that little bit less. So I wanted to when it's always like stakes are up here. So I wanted to bring it back to, oh, you know, the diner that you go to, the Hurley Street Bar and Grill that's covered in chrome and neon and has the two of the letters have been out for 20 years now. You know, Riva can't pay the back rent, and the landlord wants to bulldoze it. That's your conflict. So anybody who has Riva's diner on their sheet, that conflict is under threat. You're going to take a hardship and resolve it,
Yeah.
or you're going to suffer the hardship of Riva's diner closing.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with the A Team,
Oh yeah, come
but
on.
but
Like,
it could be very A Team esque. You know,
yeah,
it's like or Equalizer for that matter. It becomes very soap opera esque in some
yeah,
cases, and I always felt the kung fu movies were very much that. So here in Chicago, I'm not sure, maybe around the United States or around the world, we used to have Samurai Sundays, and so on Sunday they would do, oh, I don't know, samurai movies all day, and so you got to see some of the best ones ever produced. I mean, and they are absolutely obscure in American culture, but they brought them to light, and I just love them. And to your exact point, there was conflict, there was disappointment, there was sadness, there was tragedy, and then there was triumph at the end.
yeah.
You know, and they use those to motivate themselves to become better. So I think that's kind of what your game's trying to do.
Exactly. Fight to Survive, role playing martial arts meets heart, is about the fun that you can have as a player, imagining that tragedy and triumph. And it can be a learning curve for people. It can be a stumbling block because some
Sure.
people are, and like people have all kinds of different fun, right? Some people really want a power fantasy. That's how they want to spend their time. That's how they want to spend their role playing time. And like no disrespect to that, but this game is not a power fantasy. It's about it has an element of struggle to it and has an element of tragedy to it. And if that's your jam, you know, we got you covered. Well, whatever. I mean, system dictates play. So whatever you're doing that's mechanically reinforced is what players will do. Like they'll lean into whatever is incentivized within the system.
Right.
And I think that there's a lot of genre emulation that is yet to happen in role playing games, and there's a lot of things that we have yet to do. And I don't believe in trying to use one system to do all of those things because it's going to incentivize only what it was built to incentivize. So let's have new designs and go new and interesting places with them. Is where I'm like, of course I'm saying that as a role playing game designer, right? But
But you're saying that as a player too.
I am also saying that as a player. I
Yeah.
can't not, right? It's just you know, if you have a game where you get experience for gold, then you're going to try and get a lot of gold. If you have a game where you only get experience for killing things, you're going to kill a lot of things. So there's a lot of room for design space where you can explore new and interesting aspects. And this was me wanting to explore how can I achieve emulation of, you know, an 80s action movie like Best of the Best and a Shaw Brothers kung fu movie like The Chinatown Kid.
Mhm. Yeah.
And or like the TV show Cobra Kai is probably a great example
Right.
because it's a mix of like emotional motivation and like story scenes
Mhm.
and fighting. The Warrior is another show that's fantastic. Cinemax is The Warrior, and
Okay.
it takes place in the I don't remember, the 20s. I think the 20s, could be a little bit earlier, the 1920s, and it deals with the Tong Wars and has conflicting motivations and loyalties and kind of a, you know, a little bit of a political mess and problems with racism and violence and a lot of fighting. So it paints a kind of elaborate landscape.
I would imagine in your game, session 0 for you, or session 0 for me is very important. So I'd imagine session 0 for you would be everyone's building their character, they're going through and figuring out what their comforts are, and there's going to be some sort of backstory behind there, because there's got to be some gravitas. And during that process, you're also possibly collaboratively building that backstory with other players, like Mel's Diner. That turns out that the person you're playing with happens to be Mel's son, and there's
Exactly. Yeah.
so like this interconnection, which also allows you to possibly have the same comforts.
Yep. Yeah, you share comforts. You can share comforts, and you just change the relationship typically. I mean, you could keep it the same, but I've never known anybody who's interested in keeping it the same. So like if I and it's a little bit different when I run it for a home game and what's going to be in the book versus what I run for a con game, because when I run at a convention, I just write down comforts on cue cards, and I put the cue cards in the middle of the table, and there's some repeats, and people can like divide them up and then write them on their character sheet, because then I know that they're balanced, and I've prepared a kind of structure based on what those comforts are. But if you guys decide that Mel's Diner is the place, somebody could be like, oh, I'm going to be Mel's son. Somebody else can be like, I can be the cook, and like somebody else can be like, oh, I just go there sometimes to eat pie, because all I care about is the pie, and in fact, I'm putting pie down as my thing. So whenever I have pie, it's good. It's gonna be like shoot, what was that? It's a Kyle MacLachlan twin. Oh, now I'm blanking on
See,
things. But anyway,
it happens to all of us.
But anyway, like eating the cherry pie, can provide you comfort. It's whatever provides you comfort. It could help you resist the hardships of your life, and you get a lot of hardship because you get into fights, and you get into fights, you get hurt. So that's how it goes. Yeah, it's a horrible cycle. It's a vicious cycle.
Well, I'm really looking forward to the game coming out. I know it's just a few days away from now. Hopefully this interview shows up somewhere around that time.
Yeah,
maybe a little bit after. But it is something that I didn't know that I wanted until you said you did it. So I'm going to back it, because I think this would be hysterically funny for me to play as a Samurai Sunday kid, and also emotionally destructive. Because I'm a Samurai Sunday kid. So I know the terror that is Kung Fu. That being said, I do have something I do at the kind of toward the end of my interviews. It's like my top 5, my lightning round.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
So I have a couple defaults that I ask because they're very hot topics.
Sure.
Cake or pie?
I'm celiac. So my cakes and my pies tend to be very different from your cakes and your pies.
Absolutely.
But I would probably go with cake, because it's usually safer.
Chocolate or vanilla?
Chocolate every time. I'm sorry. No. Like I don't mean to insult vanilla. I know the vanilla bean is a fine flavor, and I know it takes a lot of work to harvest a vanilla bean, but chocolate. I have a problem with chocolate, maybe.
I apologize. My allergies have been killing me for like 2 weeks.
It's all the chocolate.
Yeah. I thank God I'm not allergic to chocolate. I'm just diabetic.
Okay.
So beat that celiac disease.
Yeah.
Anyway. So are you more of a spring or a fall kind of person?
I'm a fall person, definitely. I think I have an autumn complexion, and I enjoy the colors of fall. Yeah. And it's a lovely time. Yeah.
It is. I enjoy both spring and fall, but I also do enjoy summer. Winter, I enjoy just a smidge. I like fall right before it starts to rain all the time. So
yeah.
The foliage is awesome.
Yeah, no, I really enjoy. Well, I grew up on a farm, right? So I'm used to like the just as far as the eye can see, things being gorgeous in the fall. So those connotations stay with me. Whereas the spring was often everything thawing, and you've got mud up to your boots. Like
Yeah, this is true. And you've got to trudge through all that crap. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
In your genre, if you had to give me your top 2 martial arts movies, what would those be?
Top 2? You only want 2? Okay.
Well, I mean, because if I give you 10, you're gonna give me 20. If I give you 2, you'll give me 5.
Oh, you're right. I'm gonna give you 5. So 36 Chamber of the Shaolin is probably my favorite kung fu movie. I know it's a kind of an obvious one to pick. I also really enjoy Master of the Flying Guillotine, even though there's not a lot of martial arts in it. It's more gimmicky, but it's a wonderful cacophony. And otherwise, Prodigal Son is probably one of my favorites, definitely. Sammo Hung did the choreography for it. It was Wing Chun, so it's kind of an uncharacteristic kung fu, but to display on screen. But it's one of my favorites by far. As a strange pick, the movie Gallants came out in 2018 or something, fairly recently, and it's a wonderful emotional exploration of kung fu and what the kung fu legacy has meant, and is a very overlooked gem, Gallants. Like I know a lot of people would give a list of like, Donnie Yen films and things nowadays, and I do love his work, but Gallants is overlooked, and Prodigal Son is often overlooked. And also I'd like to emphasize the work of Cynthia Rothrock, who I think is an unappreciated gem, especially when she was in Hong Kong cinema. And my fifth pick would be Yes, Madam, which is a movie that she did with Michelle Yeoh, who has risen to tremendous popularity, but like she's definitely gotten her due at this point. But poor Cynthia Rothrock never really achieved as much in terms of mainstream success. But they did a wonderful movie together called Yes, Madam, which kind of spawned a whole subgenre of police women in the Hong Kong film running around kicking butt.
Definitely have to check it out. That's for sure. So everyone watching, those are the top 5 to watch.
Well, the top 5 off the top of my head, anyway.
Oh yeah, exactly. I can't let you dive any deeper, otherwise it's gonna go meta. So I know there are comforts in your game. So if you had to pick, what do you think would be your biggest comfort?
I mean, you'd already talked about the chocolate, right?
Really? Is it?
Let me see. I probably relate a little bit too heavily to my work. I'm a magazine publisher during the day, so I would definitely put like the output of my work as a comfort. And being able to produce things, to publish things, to have things to hold is very gratifying. So that would be one. Other than that, I have a King Charles Cavalier Spaniel that I think would make the list. And I think I'd have to put my kids down just in case my wife and kids ever see this. So I'll put that down.
I like it. They hit number 3 on that list.
I knew I forgot something. Yeah.
Well, it's maybe I'll rearrange them for some. Throw me a 20, and I'll make sure it's added appropriately. Yeah. James, I appreciate you coming on. I wish you the absolute best with your game. I am going to back it because I am super, super, super curious to introduce this to people and see what they will do. Because as you said, as a DM or as a GM, it is more fun to see how people make this their own.
Yeah, all I have to do is say, like, pick a comfort and say that's under threat and how it's under threat, which, and then the situation just goes people choose to deal with it or not deal with it, or the whole thing goes sideways. Yeah, it's a fun system, and I like it very much, and I hope that it finds its audience.
Oh, I'm sure it will. Absolutely. Again, thanks for coming on. It was an absolute pleasure, and I wish you the absolute best. If you need anything from me, please let me know.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Absolutely. And if you guys like this video and you like the content, click a thumbs up and subscribe down here. That would really help me out. So everyone have a great day. Thanks again, James, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
No,
I've got to say, one of the things that drove this game for me, I'm a big guy, like I'm 6'4", I'm pretty strong, and I grew up in a small town, and it was sometimes a very violent situation. And I was growing up queer in a small town.
Yeah.
And I got into a lot of fights because of it.
Yeah, me too.
And I grew up tough because that was the only way that I could be myself.
Sure.
Right. So I would periodically get jumped on the way home. Like late at night, with people yelling faggot and things like this, and have to fight my way out. And I'm not saying fighting is fun. Fighting is horrible.
It is. It's terrible.
And I didn't want to be in it, and I didn't want to do it. But I was very good at it because I survived. And I had those options of you survive or you don't survive. Small towns are rough on queer kids.
Yeah, definitely.
So
big towns. I grew up in Chicago, and it was rough on me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I was actually born in a very small town in Oklahoma. And so going back there was difficult. I mean, when Sean and I went back to visit my family, and we'd do this every year or every 2 years, it was a bunch of rednecks at a truck yelling faggot and throwing shit at us. And I was like, whatever. But what I learned was, and I had to fight my way through adolescence, not only because I was gay, but because I was emotionally aware.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to make sure that people were okay. And that was a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
And so I actually, and this is a honest to God true story. All the people who I thought were my friends
Mhm.
decided they wanted to fight me. And so it
Oh,
was a near daily basis where I had to fight somebody just
yeah.
because they felt that I was too emotionally insecure or emotionally weak and they needed to toughen me up. And so, I mean, I would literally, it was like, I would just show up and like, who am I fighting today? And I get my ass kicked sometimes. I kick somebody's ass, whatever. But at the end of the day, all those people who I grew up with who should have been some of my best friends in life, I don't talk to anymore.
Yeah.
And it breaks,
Yeah.
and these are guys I play D&D with. I mean, these are people who I should really be on this program talking to me,
Yeah.
and I don't even talk to them anymore. So I mean,
Yeah.
I get what you went through because I went through the same thing, and it's brutal and dirty and just disgusting. I'm not a fan of violence.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Me
use my
neither.
words if I can.
Yeah.
When Sean and I first met, we were at a bar, and Sean was drunk as you are at a bar, and he decided to mouth off about some guy.
Mhm.
And I was like, you need to quiet down. And so finally, this guy came over and said, I'm going to kick your ass. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. The guy left, we leave, and all of a sudden it's 5 guys show up and it's just me and him.
Yeah.
And so I told Sean, I'm like, go to the car, I'll deal with what I got to deal with.
Yeah.
And I was able to talk them all off that ledge because I'm like, we're in the middle of Boys Town in Chicago. And I'm like,
Yeah.
do we really need this headline? A bunch of gay guys getting into a fight. I'm like, it's hard enough for us already. So I
Yeah.
was able to get them to walk away, but I'm like, I've had to deal with that my entire life, just like you have. So I get it. I get
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, so I like part of the impetus was wanting to make a game that like actually felt like fighting did and didn't make it glorious, right? And but you still get to have fun, right? Like it's still about having fun. Like I don't want it to just be a miserable experience, but like coming from my history, I guess I wanted to explore that space, so to speak, in a design sense. Yeah. But anyway, I wanted to share that.
That's a wonderful story. I may. Do you mind if I include part of that in the interview?
Oh, you can go right ahead. That's
Okay.
fine. Like I don't know
'Cause-
how presentable I made myself.
I don't know how I'm sitting here smoking at that point.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
maybe it may be a Nick after night type thing, but because I think that story is very important. As a matter of fact, I feel like that's probably the most important part of the reason why he created this game.
I think it is in a way. I mean, like it has to do with me sitting on a pillow at my parents' house watching Bloodsport or whatever too. But like, there's a lot that goes into like you can't write a book without bringing yourself into it, right? And you can't write a tabletop role playing game without bringing yourself into it either.
Right.
And that's just how it goes. And I wanted to explore those experiences, so to speak. Like his tabletop role playing games are a lot about exploring identity politics, and and I wanted to make that a space where you could do that in terms of situations,
And that's the reason why, I'll pivot a little bit because I feel like you touched on something I firmly believe in is I love role-playing games for kids because I feel like as a young adult playing, it formed who I was because I was able to explore all of these complicated emotional situations in a very non-consequential space, right? So I was able to kind of formulate how I would deal with certain social interactions without having to worry about real life implications.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
so I felt like that really that kind of it may have hardened my opinion of being very empathetic with
Yeah.
people and trying to make sure that and that's how I play my characters. It isn't, I'm a terrible role player from the standpoint of I can't play the heavy.
Yeah.
I'm just not that person. Like,
You
yeah,
know,
I'll go
not
in and
every-
kick your ass, but I'm like, are you okay?
Yeah, not everybody has to be everything,
Right,
but
right.
but I mean, role playing games are like part of why I love the hobby so much. Is it's such a fantastic space for the identity exploration, right? I have a very good friend of mine, who she was born male, and over the course of 15 years of role playing only female characters, finally came to terms with her identity and was able to transition because she felt the safety of her role playing space. Not every story can be as like a lovely and round as that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
But it's still it can teach you a lot about who you are as a person and who you could be and exploring different ideas of identity. So that's part of why I really love it in a shared space, like, which is part of what makes me so upset when people make the space not safe, right? Like when people make that's because it's people are vulnerable when they're role playing. When they're role playing well and everything's going well, like you're wearing your heart on your sleeve in a way, right? And that's why when it's people come in to not make it a safe space, it becomes such a big deal.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I one quick, so like all these guys who are, fucking with me and beating me up and all this other stuff, we still played D&D together. I mean, I let it go. I was like, I forgive, but I don't forget.
Yeah.
So like to this day, I remember, but I remember I was playing a cleric and very much into converting people to the god that I was in. And so I convinced one of the fellow players to follow. It was a guy in D&D called Polaris, the god of the dawn at that point. But so I wrote this whole ceremony where I was basically given a baptism and things like that. I'm a spiritual person. I'm not a religious person. So I really put my all into it. And so I'm reading this and there's not a dry eye in the house. All these big tough guys who decided they want to kick my ass because I was emotionally insecure or whatever, they're all bawling their eyes out and they still talk about that today.
Well, Mike, it sounds like you were the one who was emotionally aware, not emotionally insecure. Like it sounds like you had empathy.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something a lot of 15, 16-year-old kids have.
Well, I hope I'd like to think that space is changing. And
I hope so. Yeah, through games like yours and through talks like this, and through the space, I think that we're preparing people to be more actualized about themselves and about their own feelings now than they probably ever have been.
I hope so, and I hope that's something that we can keep the momentum going, because I see, especially in our hobby, a lot of swinging the other way. And that can get really troublesome. And all you can do is make a stance and be strong and continue to promote good values. Like I don't know what else to do. Like you make a stance and you promote good values, and you have to. Yeah, it's a jungle. It's a jungle trying to, but you do what's important. Yeah.
But let's get back together and chat again.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Mike. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
It was my absolute pleasure. So let's talk again.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Okay.
All right.